Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? Yep, brilliant, great. Well, thanks for coming. It's really good to be back in person, talking at these events and have a crowd to actually bounce off. So, yeah, my name is Rishi. I work as a group manager at Avanade. Used to be Altius, got quite in start of 2021. So I'm a data platform MVP. I run two main communities at the moment. One's called Learn Data Insights. So this is all about quizzes for helping people prepare for Microsoft exams and also courses. And actually the governance one that I'm doing later this afternoon, I'm putting this a course there and also one on financial reporting. So there's not much on there at the moment, but I'll build it up over time. And the other one is Power Platform Finance, which is all about applying Power BI specifically and a bit more of the Power Platform more broadly to finance processes and financial reporting. So I am an accountant by background. I don't do a huge amount of accounting these days, but I thought I'd try and combine that accountancy with Power BI. So what we're going to look at today is why we want to consider storytelling as an approach for data visualization, what distinguishes the types of storytelling that we can do with data, and how to build a data visualization using these principles. There is a link at the bottom. I've put it on most of the slides, so that's the code. So yeah, if you want to provide feedback, load it up before if you can. It'll be really, really helpful for me. So we're going to start with kind of why tell stories with data. And firstly, what is a story? So I just put this into search engine, and this is what comes up, I think, as one of the first results. Stories, telling of an event. Actually, stories, when you start to look into stories, they're quite innate to what we are as human beings. One of my favorite non-fiction authors, a guy called Yuval Noah Harari, he's wrote *Sapiens*. And you read all of this, and he talks about fictions, he talks about stories, he talks about that's the reason why we are the most powerful species on the planet, and not animals, because animals stick in tribes of about 10 to 15 people, whereas we invent stories about nations, about corporations, about money, about things that bind us together. So stories are really innate to how we communicate, and have done for millennia. But what makes a good story? Well, actually, a good story, if you think about any film, if you think about books, there has to be tension, right? If you think about like Romeo and Juliet, if they were just two ordinary people from families, they met, went on a few dates, drank a bottle of wine and then got married, there's not much of a story there. There has to be some kind of conflict and tension to really pull it out. And the same applies with data visualization. Your characters in a data visualization are your audience that you're preparing the story for. They're the actors in your story. And the tension is about your performance, the data. What is it telling you? Is your performance good or bad? Is it better than last month? Is it worse than you expected? Why? And you're resolving that conflict through the story. So there's lots of parallel there around what makes a good story. Now, I think people in data visualization or in our world are generally quite nervous about this. And I think there's two main reasons why. Number one, if you're building a report for other people to use, which is quite common, you might not be as close to the business, as close to the data, if you like, as they are. So then you think, well, actually, it's not my place to tell people how they should interpret this. We should let the data speak for itself. That's kind of one viewpoint, very common, very understandable. The other is that you say, well, actually, let me come on to them. I'll come on to these. And I think they're valid points. The other thing I was going to say is the data changes, right? So when you have a dashboard that refreshes every day, what the story it tells today might not be the same story it tells tomorrow. So then you think, well, how can I tell a story with something that's not static? So I think those are the two things, and they are valid points. But I'll cover, actually, how we can get around some of that when we build data visualization. But the point is, it's still very important to do it, because your job as a data visualization specialist is to strip out that noise. You've got all of this data, and at the beginning, it's all just noise. It's just, you can't see the wood for the trees. So your job is to actually refine that, is to understand it, to internalize it, and communicate what it's telling you. So yeah, I mean, this is just some of the science behind why stories. Again, we've talked about this. It's, it's quite innate to how we are as humans. It affects, how we interpret things. People remember stories. People really resonate with them. But from a Power BI perspective, this is your real reason. Now, I've been there many times where I've spent months and months building a Power BI report, on a large complex area for business, publish it, and then I go into it a few weeks later, and the only person who's been in it is me. So usage metrics, right? And then you start to ask yourself why. And really, it's because a lot of these reports, especially for large organizations, they try and be all things to all people. We're going to distribute this to 5,000 people, and everyone's going to get value out of it. But actually, not everyone has the same things they want. They don't have the same insights they want to get. They're operational level, executive level, even within the same team, within the same role, people have very specific things they want from their reports. So unless it's really, people might go into it initially and be like, especially if it looks nice, they'll be like, oh, this is cool, spend a couple of minutes, come out, and then, not go back until they're prompted to. So it's really important, I think, to understand what stories drive better user adoption, stories that are targeted at a specific audience. So let's go into now the different types of storytelling. And what I wanted to do here was draw an analogy with academics. So I'm going to take myself back to university. I did philosophy and economics as a degree at LSE in London. I remember going through some really, really obscure texts. It was like Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, and like Kant, like really, really obscure stuff. And then so as I'm reading through this or I'm attending lectures, the first thing I'm doing is taking notes. So I'm taking some notes on what that is. The audience for that is me. It's me exploring the concepts. It's me trying to find areas of interest or patterns or things that I can relate to. And my scratch pad is just my own notes. Now, then when it comes to the end of the year, I don't just hand in my notes. I don't just put some highlighter on it, make it look nice, and there you go. That's me done for the year. You could do that. It probably won't go down too well. But you have an exam, right? So then you have to write an essay. So then someone, the examiner has asked a specific question. So what you have to do then is build an argument for it. You have to say, okay, I want to understand how Aristotle interpreted habits as good behavior. Discuss. And then you have to make a series of points to answer the exam question. And so this is your kind of guided analysis exploration. You can see the kind of parallels with reports. You're guiding the users through a series of arguments to answer an exam question. And again, for data visualization, users experience the data, and your canvas is one or more structured report pages. So exploratory analysis. And then, so all great, sit the exams, come out with the first, and then a few years later, I get approached by a book publisher. This is not true, by the way. And they say, right, we want to make this philosophy knowledge, this timeless philosophy knowledge, we want to make it accessible to children. We want to do a children's storybook. And you say, okay, again, you can't just take your essay. You can't just say, here you go, I'm going to just reproduce the essay in a children's storybook. You have to distill the messages into pictures and a few key words that they're going to understand. And if you've heard the analogy of children with executives, you'll understand that they have very short attention spans. They don't care about the detail. They trust that the detail's there and it's right. And so really that's your audience for executives, the children's storybook version. So it's an explanatory presentation. So we go from exploratory on the far left to explanatory on the far right. And your purpose of this is very different. It's to understand the recommendations or your actions. It's all it is. It's just to give them what it's telling them. And your canvas is your dashboards or maybe even Power BI goals with an annotated reports. Typically, this is done in PowerPoint, but actually you can do it. I'll show you in Power BI as well. So one of the examples I've learned some of this stuff from is Storytelling with Data, Cole Nussbaum-Affleck. And she uses the example of oysters and pearls in oysters. So your job is to kind of reveal the pearls. Now, in this example, you're going through and you're just opening up lots of oysters, trying to see if they have pearls in or not. In this example, you've already opened the oysters. You know where the pearls are. So now you're guiding people to those oysters that contain the pearls, right, to find a series of pearls that they want. And in this example, you're just giving them the pearls. You're not having to have them to go through and look for stuff themselves. So that's the different types of stories. And we'll go through some examples, actually, of how these look. So now we come on to the kind of main bit around how do we actually tell the story? How do we tell these different types of stories? I'm going to focus on the exploratory type, the middle one, really, because we could go, obviously, notes. I think people know how to clicky, draggy, droppy onto Power BI to analyze data, and I think the third one we'll come on to afterwards. So there's 7 kind of key steps to this. So we need to familiarize ourselves with the assessment criteria. And I'm keeping with that exam academic analogy here with the assessment criteria. Know your audience, make the insights obvious, pick your arguments, and I'm referring to arguments specifically rather than statements. So, I mean, I'll go through this, but, a statement is, we sold 200 widgets last month. Okay, great. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that better than expected? It doesn't mean anything. An argument is a statement with context that tells you whether it's good or bad. And so that's what we're kind of going to look through, how to build arguments with the data and context into your visualizations. We need to then have a clear user journey through a visualization. We need to keep it simple, chart junk and all of that, remove all of that, reduce cognitive load. And number 7 is to guide attention. And actually, this is the key because, what the aim, if you take one thing away from today, the single soundbite for the whole day is, for this session at least, is that the aim of data visualization is to reduce cognitive load. That is the aim of data visualization. It's to make it easy for people to get what the information they need. And actually, that's actually very important for again, same analogy for using it for exams, right? So one of the best pieces of exam advice I got, and actually one of the reasons I did do well in academics, isn't because I was cleverer than people who got a 2-1 or a 2-2 in my degree. Definitely not. I didn't have a better knowledge of philosophy or economics. But what I did understand, I think, better than a lot of people was actually exam technique. And one of the main pieces of exam advice I got on there was actually saying, well, examiners they have a lot of exams to mark, and as a result, they're very busy and very lazy. Right? You have to make it really clear to them how they can give you the marks. And if you actually look at any kind of exam assessment grid, you'll see it. It's all, have they made a point? Have they given an example? Have they evaluated it? And it's those high-level skills that you just tick through. And that's what you want to make it as, if you're doing any kind of exams, or if you have kids who are doing exams, just teach them that structure. Just tell them, find out what it is they need to do, and just structure their answers. And it's the best way to do things. Same thing with data visualization. What are you actually being marked against? And so this is from, I got this from Zebra BI, Andre. And he said, okay, when you go into a report, look at your report. You want it to tell you these 3 things. You want it to answer these 3 things at a high level. Is my performance good or bad? How good or bad? Also 4 things. Why? And what can I do about it? The so what? And if you actually look at most reports, they'll fall down on at least one of those, if not all 4. It's not about making data look pretty. It's actually about answering, that's what you're actually being assessed against, consciously or subconsciously. The next thing is, does it look good? And the reports do actually have to look good. They have to be visually appealing for people to use. But also, UX is much more than just about design. UX is actually about everything from performance to user experience to navigation. All of those things come into design. And we can't assume that people just know how to use Power BI. We often do. If we work with Power BI every day, we just assume people know to do drill-throughs and to hover over for tooltips. But actually, we need to guide them through that journey. So make things obvious, make it easy to use, make it easy for them to get the insights they want. So this is what we're trying to achieve with data visualization. The next thing is know your audience. And what I'm going to do here is actually going to pull up an example, because I think we need to get back and actually look at some data. So I was going to duplicate. So this is an example of something I worked on quite a while ago with a client, and it was a big construction type projects. So they had this data, they had lots of work packages. So these work packages might be, nuts and bolts they need delivered, or things that need to be done that relate to a particular area of work. So you've got work package number. And then each of those work packages has to go through a series of processes in terms of designing, request for information, going out, request for proposal to contractors or suppliers, issue it, bid return, technical evaluation. And it's got dates against each of these. When was it planned? When was it forecast? When was the actual date completed? As you can see, this is based on real examples. And then at the end, you've got these two dates here, ROS, which is the date that is required on site, the date that it needs to be there in order for the schedule to not slip. And then you've got the ETA, when is it actually expected to currently be on site. And so we've got this data for the last month and for current month, July and August. And then we've got some reference data. Stages, what are the different stages, who's responsible for it, what are the activities, and then the work packages, activity type, cost, made up some examples here, brickwork, concrete base, so on. And one of the things then I was like, okay, so let's now look at, let me try and extend my screen again and see if that works. So I started putting this into Power BI. Let me show again. It's there, I think. Right, I'm just going to duplicate again, sorry. So one of the things that I then did was say, okay, I could put this into Power BI. I've got all of these dates, 20, 30 dates. And I could do, a table and do lots and lots of relationships, use relationship and have all these dates and try and do some analysis. But actually, there's so many ways I could go with this. I had to come back and say, well, what are they actually interested in? And so what needed to do was actually go and find the people who this report was actually for. Who is it actually going to be used for? So delivery leads. And so, by the way, this is an example of a scoping template I have I do this in all my community examples. I do use it at work as well. It's just kind of a one-pager per report page to get down to user stories in terms of who's the audience, what are they interested in, what keeps them awake at night, and what are the business questions they specifically have that they want to answer from a report. Without this, it's very, very hard to design a data model, and it's very, very hard to build a report because you don't know what you're building. You don't know how to structure your data model. You listened to Alberto and Marco, if any of you at the pub yesterday, and you said, the first hour, you have an hour to solve a problem. The first 50 minutes are discovering what the problem is, and then the 10 minutes is solving it. So unless you know what it is that you need to design, you've got so many options. You need this for both of them. So the first thing is to identify the user stories and the users. So who is, ideally specific people. Then you have problem statements. So what is their problem statement? Again, it's a user story, right? As a user X, I want to be able to do this so that I can do this. Then you've got the key questions they want to answer. And what I found here, actually, was that it wasn't so much they were interested in all the stages. What they were really interested in was the delay, the difference between those last two columns, the ETA and the required on-site date. Those difference between those two dates was what they call the float. And that was what they were really interested in, because that means, we've got a delay, we've got impact, we're getting it later, potentially, than we wanted to. But also, not just that, but more specifically, because they could just do that in Excel, right? You could just have a column that just says that date minus that date, filter for where one is less than the other. You don't need a Power BI report for that. But what they really wanted to know was to say, well, look, we know some of them are delayed. They'd be delayed for months. We're working on it. What I really want to know is what's become delayed this month somehow, and which specific ones are those? Because that's something I could do something about right now. I know if this work package is delayed at this stage, I can go and speak to the procurement owner. I can go and speak to someone to actually get this done. So that's what they really wanted. And so then you come up with the questions. How many work packages are delayed this month, the float? Which ones have become delayed within the last month, i.e. they weren't delayed last month, they are delayed now. And so how overall I'll delay them. And then you come up with the measures, the KPIs that would help you answer those questions. which measures do I need to be able to answer those questions? So it's things like number of work packages, number delayed, number which have become delayed in the last month. And then kind of you go through, and this is a completely non-technical exercise. You say, okay, well, what would you need to view and filter those measures by in order to be able to answer those questions? So things like stage, activity type, time. And now you're starting to see here, this is a data model we're designing here. We're just not talking about it in data model technical terms, but it's a data model. We can conceptually design our data model. This gives us the blueprint for what we need in Power Query to then build our data model. And it gives us the starting point for our DAX measures and our dimensions. And then the last one is just very high level, what kind of data do we need to be able to answer those questions? And that's what you validate your data model against. So that was the first thing, know your audience. That's why that's really important. A scoping template, that's how you capture requirements for it. Now, what you want to do, the third one, is make the insights obvious. So there's two ways you can go from that scoping template. The one is designing data model. That gives you a blueprint for what you need in Power Query. The second is storyboarding. So with storyboarding, what you do here is literally, again, with the end users ideally, you just brainstorm. You say, okay, and what you don't do is ask them, what graphs do you want to see on a page? Just never ask that question. I've been there too many times. You'll end up with too many different answers, and they don't really know, even if they think they do. And yeah, you'll just get yourself into a rabbit hole. So you don't ask them that. You ask them, okay, let's brainstorm some things that you'd want to see, some insights. And these might actually just be on Post-it notes, by the way, not as visuals. Again, do it low tech. Even though it's so easy to produce graphs in Power BI, just start with pen and paper Post-it notes. It will just encourage much more creative thinking, and you're just not tied by technical constraints and all the rest of it. And then you're coming up here with your insights. So these could be statements or could be arguments. And you just put them on a Post-it note, and then you kind of prioritize them and think about which are the ones that are most interesting. So actually, these could be titles of your charts. They could end up as titles of charts. Don't worry about how you're going to visualize those or what you're going to do with those. That will come afterwards. That's your job when you're building the report. This is, again, your blueprint, your spec for what you need to build. So we've got things like, okay, I can't actually read. I'll do it on my one there. But you've got your key points. And remember, people read in a Z fashion. So at the top left-hand corner, that's where you want your key metrics, your key information. Then you can drill down into a bit more detail or understand a bit more why. And that's kind of then how you prioritize. And try and not have too much on a kind of page. So the idea here is you'll end up with loads of Post-it notes, and then you'll say, okay, page 1, what do you want to see? And you'll take a Post-it note and put it onto the thing. And then try and get people to agree, which is easier said than done on that. For this procurement example, so let's have a look. God, I can't even read this actually, sorry. But basically, we start off with a few key metrics. Number of work packages delayed this month. I think total delay in days. Some key metrics at the top. And then we had, I ended up representing this as a table. So you've got some arguments there, and then you've got some more detail there. So this is your detail one there. And this is kind of an example of the report page I ended up with. And it kind of shows, so you've got your key metrics at the top, procurement analysis. You've got then number of work packages newly delayed, now delayed, and then number of work package, like total delay in months. And then you could think about the interactions. So you can click on a bar, and it will show you those work packages. And we've got the float there, the difference between the two dates. The other thing to highlight here is that what you want to also be able to do is express your report page as a big idea. This is, again, coming from Colin Spam and Affleck. It's your elevator pitch for that page. Now, this is what is this actually telling you? What is this actually saying? So it's saying X work packages are now delayed compared to Z the previous period. These ones are stuck at procurement stage, whatever, for which this person's responsible. And this is really about your insights. Now, bear in mind here, I haven't put in actual numbers or actual people, because that might change. Actually, it might be 3 delayed this month, it might be 5 delayed next month, but that doesn't matter. The story doesn't change. What I'm trying to get across doesn't change, even if the values themselves change. If that says 0, great, I'm happy, but that doesn't change the story. right? It's not as tension, not as good a story, but we don't want to create problems just to tell a good story, right? That's not a good thing to do. So this is what we want to get across, the big idea. What is the total delay on these? And you could write this out as a kind of little paragraph sentence. Okay, so we've covered know your audience, we've covered the storyboarding, and then also kind of the big idea. So now we're looking at arguments, picking your arguments. And remember, I was saying the difference. Statement is just a number. An argument is a number with context. So this is a reason potentially to use some custom visualizations or to think about how you customize existing visuals. Now, a little bit wary about this. I think 80% of your graphs should be really simple to easy to understand bars and lines, because that's what people can interpret well, and it shows the information. The challenge with that is it doesn't usually give you any real context, right? Even if you have sales by region, and Europe shows the highest sales, well, if Europe's your biggest region, it's going to show the highest sales. Again, that's not giving you enough context for it. So what you could do is actually say, well, actually, what I'll do is add a bar chart and do a bullet chart instead. And actually, some of these probably should be, it would be ideal if they were native visuals, but that's a bullet chart in the bottom left-hand corner, where you've got a bar chart, but then you've got a reference line to say what the prior period was or what the target was, or something like that. So now you've got that context to say, I can see Europe's the biggest, but actually it's also above target, and that's giving you that context. Card visuals, again, great to show a number, show what your revenue number is, but you need context. So there's KPI cards, which give you a difference to target. Or here I've actually done my own, but that's 4 visualizations in one. Again, not ideal, but at least you're showing here what your prior year value was, what the change in the prior year value was, and whether that's positive, favorable, or unfavorable. You've got waterfall charts, really popular with finance people because it shows you a measure at one point in time, for example, or a measure at one reference point, a measure at the other reference point, it might be a later point in time, and then what's contributed to that difference between 1 million and 10 million. It's gone up this much, 5 million here, down 2 million there, allows you to get that breakdown. So I can see why waterfalls are very popular. Again, it's giving you that context to say relatively how big or small of these contributed to the overall difference. Then we've got scatter plots. Scatter plots automatically give you context because you've got one measure against the other measure. So one measure is the context for the other measure. So automatically you have context by using scatter plots. I really do like scatter plots as a way of visualizing measures. You've got line and column combo charts. This is a standard visual where the line, as on the different axes, can give you a bit of context to the bars. So it might be your total sales, and then you might have number of customers on the line chart. So actually you could start to see, oh, I've got loads of sales, but actually fewer customers. Okay, that means I'm actually getting more sales per customer than I was last month. So again, it's giving you a bit more context. It's giving you a bit more detail. Again, you have to be a little bit careful of these because sometimes as soon as you start to add stuff to the chart, it just becomes less interpretable. So really, pick your arguments. Tables are great, obviously, but they need something like conditional formatting or spark lines that you can do now in Power BI to be able to, again, just give you the trends and patterns. So you're not just looking through a whole table of numbers and trying to pick out the patterns yourself. You're able to kind of see, where things you need to focus your attention, guide your attention. And slopes are basically line charts, but just with 2 points, because all you're really interested in is the start to the end. Has it gone up? Has it gone down in a period of time? Right? You're not worried about all the stuff in between, ups and downs. Right? You want to just compare one point to the next point. So it, again, makes it a bit easier to understand. All of these examples, if you Google Financial Times visual vocabulary, and a guy called Jason Thomas from the US has put together this examples in Power BI for all of these, including some custom visuals as well. So it's a really good reference point to see different types of visuals. And also, the other thing you can do with this is use things like key influencers visual, because that's going to actually discover those insights for you, potentially. So you can put your factors that influence something, and then it kind of shows it to you automatically. What's the key things that's driving you? So here, these are automatically arguments, right? Because you're saying these are what are contributing to your numbers. It's not just giving you a number and letting you try to interpret that yourself. So that's picking your arguments. The next one is having a clear user journey. Now, with here, one of the things I like to think about the user journey through a report is this idea of 5 whys. So 5 whys is a concept used in lean manufacturing. I think it's come from somewhere, but it's also used by kids all around the world, where you ask why, you give them an answer, and they'll ask why, and why, and why, and why, until they get to a level of detail they're happy with, or they get bored. So it's a really good technique to actually take your users through. So let's take an example. We look at something and we say, sales were 20% lower this month. Okay, why? If you see that, you'll think, okay, why were sales 20% lower? Well, actually, our London store sold half the volume that it did the month before. So actually, okay, and again, maybe with context, London's our bigger store. So overall, that probably would have had quite a big impact. Okay, I can see why. Why did London sell less? Well, the store was closed for 10 days last month. Why? Staff shortages. Why? COVID, Boris Johnson, whatever. You get to a point of where you can actually do something about it as well then, because then you can say, right, I know there were staff shortages, we need to hire more temp staff. We need to be able, you get to the reason of why that is. So through the data visualization, you can start top level, sales were down 20% compared to last month. Then give them some breakdowns to say, okay, this is your breakdown by region, and this is maybe in scatter plot even, because then you're saying total sales and percentage decrease or increase month to month. And then you're starting to look at stuff that's got a low percentage or decrease, and it's also got a high contribution of sales. So then you know that that's contributed to your overall percentage change. Then you look at things like, production volumes or number of staff or whatever it is, days open. You're starting to be able to guide them through that journey. And you don't have to do, so that's how your visuals are structured. And you can also do it things like tooltips and drill throughs. Things like that are really useful to be able to do that root cause analysis, the 5 whys, root cause analysis. So here, yeah, it allows start at a high level and go down into detail. Well, it's got 2 more, and then we'll go into some actual demos and show some examples of these. So number 6 was about keeping it simple. And I think most people here will probably be quite familiar with these kind of concepts, which is just reducing junk and things like that, because remove everything that's not necessary for you to get that message across. And this could be things like, actually, you don't need, for example, axes and data labels necessarily on the same graph. If the individual points are important, then mark them if they're important, and then you don't need an axes because people read the data labels. Likewise, if you're not interested in specific values, but actually more just the overall trend, then you can have an axes, you don't need data labels, or as many data labels. And I mean, this is not obviously a Power BI example, because you don't have these 3D charts there that I know of. But it gets the idea across that you can, remove the colors. You don't have rainbow color charts and things like that. So yeah, keep things simple. Reduce color, reduce data labels. Keep things readable. Right. Okay. So now we're on to our last point, step number 7, which was guide attention. So for this one, we're going to need a bit of user participation. If you're ready. Okay. So I want you to raise your hand once you've got 3 exercises. I want you to raise your hand once you've got the answer, once you've got the number that we're looking for. Yep, and actually, I am going to just time it so we can see how long it's taking people. Okay. So, count the 3s. And if someone says it online, just let me know. Chris, what did you get? I think so. Yeah, okay, cool. Most people got it. Okay, about 20 seconds. Okay, let's try it now. Ah, cool. Okay, there you go. Much quicker. That was like 7, 8 seconds. What was the number? Okay, I actually can't remember. So you might be right. Okay, last one. You can probably see where I'm going with this. Count the threes. Yeah, okay. The point taken, right? So what was that? What did you get, Pragati? 10. Yeah, 10, yeah. I thought it was 9 for a reason. Okay, so really helps to highlight, right? So here, in your first example, this is just a table of data, right? It's just noise. You've got to try and interpret that somehow, or kind of pick out patterns, pick out which numbers are the most common. Here, we're using color, so all the threes are consistently coded with a color. And here, you've used gray for everything. And actually, this is a really good data visualization technique. Start with everything as gray, and then use color to bring out points that you want to highlight. And you can see why that makes it so much more obvious. So now let's look at, just again, guided attention, and think about how we're going to visualize this. So we're going to say which numbers occurred the most often in here. So not counting the threes, which numbers occur the most often. So pie chart is marked here. I'm not going to get shot down, am I? So pie chart, it's a way of showing complete to the whole. So how many occurred? And as you'll many of you will be aware, pie charts are notoriously bad for being able to interpret, because humans are not very good at being able to interpret arc sizes. Okay, so people say, okay, well, I still want to show part to whole, so let's use a tree map. And this is the same information displayed as a tree map. It's actually not that much better. Like, yes, you can see a bit more. It's a bit easier to see which of the bigger chunks are, but actually, especially when they're close together, not so much so. And then you kind of lose the ones that are smaller. So actually, maybe if you even put data labels, you wouldn't see those data labels. It doesn't tell you that much. But let's try and see what we can do. Okay, lines, yep, definitely better. You can definitely now interpret it much quicker in terms of width, but they're still a bit kind of all over the place, and you're still not exactly sure which lengths are better, a bit longer. So now we've got it's a baseline, so that was a tornado chart, or maybe it's called funnel, I think in Power BI. Now they're all baselined, and so again, makes it a bit better. Still, now you're going to have to go back and forth between here and the legend to try and work out which number is which is not great. So now we've put it on the axes, and we've put data labels. Now we're starting to get clearer. It's starting to become a lot more obvious. The cognitive load is now lower. It's now getting into those other examples. And then here's our kind of example with our number threes, for example, where now we're just highlighting all the other points that we want. And our title says number 3 and number 9 occur the most frequently. So now we're just making it obvious, and we're giving them that insights. And obviously those titles can be dynamic, right? You can have dynamic titles in there. So great. So now we've got those color is an example of a pre-attentive attribute. So you've got things like length and width, and you can change these in Power BI. You've got orientation, horizontal, vertical, spatial grouping, size. So you can change the size of bubbles, for example, on a map or something like that, and color. The key things with color is use it sparingly and use it consistently. So if Europe means purple on one chart, don't show Europe in a different color on another chart, because people will make that connection. Color is also one of the things sometimes you feel like you have the least control over, but actually, yeah, you have to do things like keep everything gray and start to think about the colors that you want to use to highlight. Okay, so those are your 7, and now we've got 10 minutes left, so we'll go through some examples. But you've got to familiarize yourself with the assessment criteria. Know, is your performance good or bad? How good or bad? Why? What can you do about it? Know your audience. Who's it actually aimed at? Scoping template, problem statements, business questions they need answering. Make the insights obvious. So have things like storyboarding. Look at how you can do that with post-it notes. Pick your arguments. Don't just show numbers, show them with context. have a clear user journey. This was things like the 5 whys, where you could guide people through that root cause analysis to understand, going from high level all the way down to the detail of why something is what it is. Keep it simple, remove chart junk, things like that, and guide attention using pre-attentive attributes like color and size and things like that. So yeah, finally down to some demos. Right, just need to get the screen duplicating. Yay, that worked that time. Okay, so I'm going to show a finance example, and that's probably all I have time for. So this is, I've got some examples of how to build all this stuff if you're interested as well, but it's quite simple data. We've just got a list of financial transactions in here. So it's got a date, and then you've got keys for organization, department, scenario, actual or budget. I think there's only 2 here, actual and budget. Account key, this is the key thing for accounting. Every transaction is against accounts from your chart of accounts, and that account could be a revenue account, expense account, asset liability, and then the amount with sign, because again, you want to show credits as positive on your income statement, so revenues as positive and expenses negative, and vice versa for debits and credits on your balance sheet. And then you've got your standard star schema, where you relate those keys to each other. That you love how Power BI gives you your tape. Yep, and you've got your standard star schema there for that. So starting off, you just have this is your notes version. This is your self-exploratory version. Chuck some data on, maybe put it into a matrix, start to calculate some basic measures that you know that people are interested in, and see kind of what it's telling you. Is there an interesting story about this? And actually, maybe just produce a financial statement. Now, this is an example I put together a long time ago. I'm still going to, I will update it at some point. But then this is then the exploratory version of it, where you're saying, okay, so we have along the top, we have our key metrics: revenue, gross profit, profit before tax, and profit after tax. And we have a bit of context to those numbers. So we're looking at what they were previously. Then we have a fixed format income statement at the bottom, actual budget variance percentage, again, using some color formatting to highlight the variances, favorable or unfavorable, and the red or green arrows. And then we've got a waterfall chart to show what, it actually says start of the month, it's actually prior month. So here we're looking at May 2008, so what was it in April 2008, what was it in May 2008, and what explains those differences. Usually actually use this for balance sheet rather than income statement, but I'm highlighting the point here that you could actually just say which organizational units have contributed most for that difference. So at a glance, you can get a lot of information. And now you can start to see this in a few different ways. So you're giving people a few different ways to analyze this data. So firstly, this is all month to date, but it's monthly numbers by default, so May 2008, but we can also look at quarter to date numbers. And now it's giving you everything as quarter to date. This is actually the first month of the quarter. This is the quarter to date value. So from the first month to quarter to date, where's that gone? And then year to date. And then we think about some of the interactions. And then we've got a few other different ways of presenting that income statement. So we've got looking at measures, comparisons. So here now you've got more of a kind of pivot table style format. And then you've got actuals. And then we also think about how this interacts. So at the moment, this is showing profit at the previous month and profit at the end the current month. But actually, if we click on one of these and we see revenue, now this shows revenue now at the start of the first month of the quarter and quarter to date. And if we did this, it would show cost of sales. So now you're allowing people to do that exploratory. We're allowing them to drill into that journey. And just the last couple of minutes, I just wanted to show you this page as well. Because this is then where we're saying, okay, now let's look at our ratios. And again, ratios are really interesting because they provide context. You're looking at your cost-income ratio, for example, your costs divided by your total revenue. And you're saying, okay, our total cost-income ratio is 53%, and it's gone up, which is bad. Your costs as a proportion of revenue have gone up, so it's red, it's bad. Now let's see where that breaks down. And we're using prior year because we want to see not just what the cost-income ratio is for each organizational unit now, but what it was last year as well. And that's what this reference line is, because now it's giving you that. And then here we have the level down. Now this could be a drill down chart. So you could go from here and drill down into the next level, which is country. But actually, here you've got all the countries plotted and they interact. And we've got cost income ratio here and revenue. Now, this revenue is really important for context because you might have a country that has a really, really high cost income ratio, right? So its cost as a portion of its revenues are really, really high. 90% of its revenue is costs, so low profits. But actually, if that country is tiny in terms of your overall sales, that's not contributing to your overall cost income ratio being low, right? So revenue here is a really important contextual number for that specific ratio. And then obviously what you could do is start to drill down. So cross highlight shows you over time. Focus on a specific country and look at the income statement for that. And then I just wanted to lastly just show the children's storybook version of this finance report, which obviously people typically do in PowerPoint. But here is where we've then just got 5 hidden pages. Each of these are bookmark, and you can just have a number to, a button to go from bookmark to bookmark. So here we start and we highlight what's important. We say, we give a bit of text. And again, you can make this text dynamic, or even if you update it, it's still you've got the structure, you've got the format of it. You're saying the cost income ratio is this, which is higher than May. And then almost all of them was European operations. You highlighted European operations. You're telling them this is where your problem is. Then you say, okay, you're going through that why journey now. So you're saying, okay, well, why? It was much higher in France than Germany, but Germany's revenue is higher overall. So actually, we provided a bit of that context to tell them, actually, it's not just as simple as saying one's higher than, it's higher in France or it's higher in Germany. You've got to also look at how big the units are for that context. But you're highlighting that with the annotations. And then we say, well, Germany is lower this year compared to last year, or whatever. So then you're showing it over time. You're putting in the time element to it now. You're showing that visual. And then with France, the trend is reversed. And lastly, you're saying, then you're going into that detail of the income statement and saying, actually, it's because if you look down at those details, you can see it's because your cost of sales was a lot higher. And actually, if you drill down into more, you can see your staff costs were a lot higher. Again, you're starting to give them the reasons why this is now. You're telling them something that they can do something about. So you need to hire more temporary staff or something like that. Cool. I think we're almost at time now. So resources are I'll put the slides out. Actually, where do we put the slides? The sessionize, right? Yeah. I think so. Okay. If they're not sessionize, I will put them up. Yep. Any questions? Sorry, I know we're probably right out of time, aren't we? 1 minute. No questions. Okay. No one's going to ask why. The link, the feedback link. Yeah. Sorry. That's the next slide. QR code. Yep.
Do you ever get into trouble with red, green citing?
Yeah, the organisation I'm working for at the moment is quite big on accessibility, actually, and it is one of those things because it's a hard balance because they are universal colours. But I mean, generally, you could use other colours to indicate good or bad or favourable or unfavourable, colour. There's tools you can go online that will show how it looks for a colourblind person. And so actually putting a filter through there and doing that, I should do that a lot more than I do. But yeah, it's and if you're interested in accessibility, listen to or watch anything by Megan Longoria. And actually, there's a Microsoft Docs series on designing accessible Power BI reports. But yeah, please do provide feedback. It'll be really useful. And if you're interested in Power BI governance as well, I'll present on that later this afternoon. So very different topic. Yep. Yes, yeah. What colours do you use instead?
Reds and greens, browns and greens, reds, blue and purple, the whole range.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, the other thing with colour you can always do as well is gradients, right? So you can have a single colour, a little corporate colour, and that's blue or something like that, and show it as a gradient. You know, high gradient means higher values, so people really get it then as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, colours is is a really interesting one there, actually. Yeah. Right, need to get ready for the next one. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really good to